Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for September 21st, 2017. On today's show, we'll be talking about a bunch of news, including a director for the Akira live-action movie, Matthew Vaughn's original plans for a young Wolverine movie, and its hopes and dreams for Kingsman 3 and spin-off films. Game of Thrones has yet another spin-off prequel show in development. We'll talk about that. And also, a returning cast member for the future of the Terminator franchise. This is Peter Sciretta, and on today's show with me is Ben Pearson.
Hey, what's going on?
Not much. We have a skeleton crew here today. As
just the two of us.
Yeah, just as Jacob is getting his Fantastic Fest stuff ready, and HT is traveling overseas for something we can't specify, and that you'll see probably in a year. But yeah, so it's just the two of us. But there has been a lot of news, so let's talk about it.
Yeah.
Akira is one of those movies that I think a lot of people don't need to see a live-action movie made, and Hollywood has been trying to make a live-action movie for quite some time. And I honestly didn't think there could be something to get me interested in an Akira live-action movie. But last night, some news came out, and you wrote it up for the site.
Yes, Taika Waititi, the director of the upcoming Thor Ragnarok. He's the New Zealand filmmaker behind that movie, and as well as like a bunch of smaller sort of comedies like The Hunt for the Wilder People and What We Do in the Shadows. He is actually the next person that Warner Brothers has tapped to potentially direct this movie. So we should say right up front that nothing is officially signed yet, but he is in talks to direct the live-action Akira film, which, as you mentioned, has been in development in one form or another since probably right around 2008, so almost 10 years now. Leonardo DiCaprio and his Appian Way Productions acquired the rights to make a live-action film back then, and at that point, DiCaprio himself was supposed to be starring in the movie. That obviously is not happening anymore since he's so much older than the characters. But Akira is based on the 1988 film from Katsuhiro Otomo, who turned an anime. He basically created an anime film out of a manga that he created as well. And if you don't know anything about this property, you probably haven't been reading movie blogs for the past 10 years, because it seems like every few months, one of these, one site or another is writing the latest update about what the hell is going on with the live action Akira movie. But Taika Waititi, man, I think, he could be the guy to finally get this damn thing made already. I feel like he's a far more interesting choice than a lot of the people that they had, attached to the film in the various incarnations of it over the years. And because he is a filmmaker of color, I'm wondering if he has a bit more sensitivity to the idea of whitewashing, which is like a huge thing that we've talked about a bunch on this podcast and all over slashfilm.com. What do you think about this whole concept in general, Peter? Do you think Waititi is a good choice to make an Akira movie?
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because weren't at one point they were going to, have a white actor play the lead, and they were going to set it in future New York instead of Tokyo.
Yeah, and I think New Manhattan instead of Neo Tokyo is actually maybe still the same setting as of right now, but maybe if Waititi comes on, he's a writer as well, so maybe he'll sort of take a swipe at the script and see if he can update some stuff, and that part may not make it into the final product whenever we may see such a thing. But yeah.
Yeah, it seems like they are aware of the sensitivities around such a project coming out of Ghost in the Shell, which had those controversies. And Jordan Peele was rumored to be in line to direct this, I think, in March. So it seems like they want a director who can be concerned about those kind of issues and has both a humor. And I didn't really think that Akira needed a comedy director, but it seems like they're going after kind of these comedy directors.
Yeah, and Waititi's an interesting guy because he's he cut his teeth making super small movies, but from everything we've seen from Thor Ragnarok so far, it looks like he's been able to seamlessly transition into a massive budget, mega blockbuster kind of movie and thrive in that environment as well. So obviously Warner Brothers is looking to avoid any sort of pitfalls, and they're looking at his resume and saying, hey, this looks pretty good. So I saw the anime one time a few years ago, and I don't really remember it being particularly funny. So it is a little weird that they're going after comedy guys, but maybe the project is just so serious that they're trying to provide some moments of levity here and there, and they just want guys who have that on their resume to be able to handle it right. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very excited about anything Taika does. I saw one of his first films, Eagle vs. Shark, at I forget what film festival, a long time ago. I'm quoted on the DVD cover, so I've been a fan of his for such a long time. I'm getting to be an old man, and so much so that I am cynical about this. Even though we know that Taika is the top guy in the running for this, I'm cynical that this is ever going to get made. I've been writing about this film for you said 10 years. Going back in the Slash Film archives, you can see my one paragraph post about this originally from probably 2007.
Yeah.
So we'll see. We'll see, but Taika definitely has me more excited for this, and I know a lot of people probably haven't seen his work. They're going to see his work in Thor Ragnarok. I would urge everybody not to just go back and see We Live in the Shadows. I feel like a lot of people discovered him with that, but go back and discover his other films. They're all great. Yes, but moving on. Matthew Vaughn is out promoting Kingsman 2. Which is hitting theaters, and obviously he's being asked about a lot of things. He was the director of X-Men First Class, and he originally wanted to apparently do a Wolverine, young Wolverine prequel movie. He tells Uprocks that, quote, "I didn't want to do a Days of Future Past next. I felt that one should be in a trilogy, and Days of Future Past should be the finale to that story. I would have done a film in between where you meet the young Wolverine in a new character, and then in Days of Future Past become the young Wolverine and the old Wolverine, and just blow it out. So that's what I would have done, but the studio didn't agree with me on that, and to be frank, as I said, it's not my sandbox, so I couldn't do anything about it. Also, it should be mentioned that Variety talked to Fox chairman, CEO Stacey Snider at the Emmys and asked if a Wolverine could be rebooted, and she gave the elusive "anything's possible" answer, which means that they aren't thinking about it, but it's possible. Right. I think, as long as Fox retains the rights to these X-Men movies, I think Wolverine is always going to be in play. He's a major fan favorite character, and we'd be stupid to think that there won't be another Wolverine movie in the future. So the question is, Ben, do we need another Wolverine reboot this early?
Maybe not this early, but it is interesting to note that Vaughn was talking about a young Wolverine facing off against an older Wolverine. And if you've seen Logan, spoiler alert for Logan, that movie's been out for a few months now. I think it's okay just to talk about it for just 2 seconds. That movie includes a Wolverine versus Wolverine battle, as HT points out in her article writing this up at Slash Film. So I think that's maybe they retained some of Vaughn's original pitch in Logan there. So that's kind of an interesting thing. I'm not sure about a full reboot of that character, though. The X-Men movies, as you mentioned, are going to be going on for a long, long time, but I think you got to give it a few years before you bring a new Wolverine into the mix.
Well, I think they could. The way to do it would have been what Vaughn said, but I think now that they're going ahead with this, the way to do it is have a standalone Weapon X movie introducing, Logan as, Weapon X and Wolverine, and then the next X-Men, First Class trilogy or series, franchise, whatever you want to call it, bring him into that. So introduce him as a separate movie and kind of do an Avengers kind of, introducing him into the mix.
Yeah, I'm just wondering about that because, like, you've got James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender and Jennifer Lawrence, who are the constants in this new, most recent trilogy. They are coming back for X-Men Dark Phoenix, but they can't be interested in sticking around for another, whatever, 10 years in this franchise. So then that means that you're checking down to the next level, right? Which is like Sophie Turner as Jean Grey, Ty Sheridan as Cyclops, Alexandra Shipp as Storm. So you've got the even newer generation there. So yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe you bring on a young Wolverine that's sort of more in line with them age-wise, and then yeah, it's sort of combine the timelines again. I mean, the X-Men movie timelines are so insane already. So, but yeah, because of that insanity, maybe there is a way to sort of backdoor that character in there.
I think there is. Matthew Vaughn is also, when he's out promoting Kingsman, The Golden Circle, and people are asking him, do you want to do a Kingsman 3? And his answer is no. No, his answer is actually yes. Because, whenever you ask a filmmaker if they want to make a sequel, unless they're like Matt Reeves or, Chris Nolan, they say yes. And he said to Cinema Blend that, quote, I think there is a story in my head which will be finished at the end of the next one. So basically a third part, quote, and then after that, of course, there could be it could be Statesman movies. There could be a spin-off character films. The universe could continue with new agents, or, Colin Firth could become Arthur, or a new character could come in, or new kids get trained. There's so many options, but I also think it's better not to be greedy, unquote. So basically what he's saying here is, he's ready to make lots of money off this Kingsman franchise.
Yeah.
As long as people are willing to pay for it. And honestly, I like the Kingsman movies. I've only seen the first one, and I've seen some clips from the second one. And I definitely see some world building in there that could be interesting for spin-off films. And definitely there's the built-in kind of James Bond-ish, like you can replace the main guy in this franchise. Would you be excited to see more Kingsman movies?
I mean, I think you keep the main storyline going. That would be fine with me. The idea of spin-offs and stuff like that with like the Statesman characters is not quite as interesting to me. I haven't seen Kingsman: The Golden Circle yet, but from doing a review roundup for that movie and sort of reading through a bunch of people's reactions to it, one of the main through lines and commonalities in all of those reviews is that a lot of the characters like Channing Tatum and Halle Berry and the new sort of Statesman characters sort of get short shrift in the new sequel. So I'm not sure if, we're going to see enough of them to have anybody excited about seeing more of them, or if people are just going to look at it as more of like a glorified cameo and then not really be too interested in what's going on. It seems like the idea for seeding those characters in for future spin-offs was like on Matthew Vaughn's mind when he was writing Kingsman 2. And this is also, it should be noted, his first sequel that he's done, even though he's made movies that sort of enter into other franchises. He didn't direct Kick-Ass 2, and X-Men First Class is sort of like its own kind of like a soft reboot of the X-Men movies. So it's interesting that he likes the Kingsman franchise enough to come back for a second one. So yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe he is really into the idea of keeping this thing going and actually directing these movies himself instead of just handing it off and maybe producing future spin-offs or something like that. But I don't know. I think I'll have to see The Golden Circle before I can fully say, oh yeah, I want to see a Channing Tatum movie or a Pedro Pascal spin-off movie or something like that.
It has just occurred to me that this episode is the Milking a Franchise to Death special edition. Since most of the stories and the mailbox are going to all have to do with that. Yeah. So moving on, HBO is planning yet another Game of Thrones prequel show. This is the 5th in development. You wrote the article for Slash Film. Tell us about it.
Yes, so I should clarify, as Casey Bloys, the head of HBO programming, did, that even though there are now 5 Game of Thrones prequels in development, that doesn't necessarily mean that all 5 are going to be greenlit or be on the air at the same time or, air back to back or anything like that. Basically, they're taking like a shotgun blast approach to this thing and just hiring a bunch of different writers, having them collaborate with George R. R. Martin and come up with different ideas and set in different time periods throughout Westerosi history, all before the events of the current Game of Thrones show, that don't have anything to do with the characters that we have seen in the current show. And HBO is just hoping that one of the 5 is good enough to pick up and move forward with. We should also say that if they do greenlight one of these prequels, it's not going to air anytime immediately after the season 8 finale. They're going to give it a little bit of breathing room before they just jump right back onto the Game of Thrones bandwagon. Oh. But it's very obvious that with as much resources and money that they're throwing at this thing, that they definitely want to keep that world as a viable playground for them to play in and create new TV shows in. Yeah. So the latest update is that Bryan Cogman, who is a writer-producer on Game of Thrones right now, is the person who's developing the 5th announced prequel show. So again, nothing is like fully official yet, but George R. R. Martin actually hinted at Cogman's involvement in a 5th prequel, I think a couple months ago, but that deal wasn't quite done yet, so he didn't mention him by name. But he was talking about how he's been meeting with all the writers and stuff like that, and he's excited about bringing all this stuff together, bringing it all to life, anything basically to keep him from writing the 6th and 7th book in the Song of Ice and Fire series, which fans have been waiting for forever. But yeah, I mean, it's Bryan Cogman is one of those guys that he's written 10 episodes of the series so far. He started out as an assistant to David Benioff and D.B. Weiss, the showrunners of Game of Thrones, and has worked his way up to become a writer and then a co-producer and now a full-on producer. So he's definitely paid his dues. He knows a lot about the world of Westeros. He actually wrote the series Bible for Game of Thrones back when he was, in the very early days of the show. So he sort of strikes me as like almost like the Pablo Hidalgo of the Game of Thrones world, like somebody who is just, has an encyclopedic knowledge of all of the nooks and crannies of this fictional world. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a good thing that he is involved in this because he knows arguably more than anybody else about this stuff aside from Benioff and Weiss, who are not going to be involved with any of the prequels moving forward.
We've seen this kind of thing happen with a lot of big blockbuster franchise films where they have like these parallel developments where they'll hire, a bunch of different writers to work on a thing at the same time. We saw this with, I guess, the Transformers writing room, where a bunch of people got in a room and came up with concepts, and eventually some of those concepts were like thrown together into one movie, which came out and was really not so good. Let's hope that doesn't happen for Game of Thrones. But HBO obviously doesn't want to let the subscribers and the money end. Yes. So also in the news, some news on the future of the Terminator franchise. Not that anybody wants more Terminator movies, but James Cameron's producing. Tim Miller, yes, is directing. And you wrote the news up last night. What do we know?
Yeah, so at a screening of Terminator 2 Judgment Day in 3D on the Paramount Pictures lot last night, James Cameron and Tim Miller, who's the director of Deadpool, if people don't recognize that name immediately, they met up and did like a Q&A and sort of announced some of the stuff that they're thinking about doing for the new Terminator movie that they've been announced to be working on. It still doesn't have a title, but James Cameron himself announced that Linda Hamilton, who played Sarah Connor in the first 2 Terminator films, is officially coming back to reprise that role in their upcoming movie. Cameron says, as meaningful as she was to gender and action stars everywhere back then, it's going to make a huge statement to have that seasoned warrior that she's become return. There are 50-year-old, 60-year-old guys out there killing bad guys. but there isn't an example of that for women. So I think he has a point there. You've got Expendables movies, you've got Harrison Ford and Stallone, kicking ass and making action movies well into their 60s, and you don't really have a good example of that on the female side of things. So Sarah Connor being an iconic sci-fi heroine, this could be good news. And Peter, you mentioned, nobody really wants another Terminator movie. I was sort of right there with you, but this kind of thing, I think, is enough to actually turn me, it may be naive, but it has me excited about a new Terminator movie. I feel like reading a lot of the comments that Cameron has talked about, has made about the potential and what he wants to do and how the themes of, technology being potentially corrupted and turned to evil uses and all that stuff, and how relevant that still is in our day and age. I feel like with him really involved instead of just, slapping his name on it, I am more interested. And the idea of Linda Hamilton coming back is like, it's one of those things that it shows me that they're making the right decisions. I've been burned a lot, Peter, by the Terminator franchise, as many fans have, but I feel like this has the potential to be pretty good. What do you think?
I do. I actually, I'm not, I like the Terminator franchise, and I actually didn't hate the last one. I think there were some interesting ideas at its core that, that Skynet came around and we didn't fight against it. We waited in line around the block to get it in our pocket, get it in our lives. And I think that's an interesting idea. Was it well executed? Maybe not the best. But I think there's definitely something to be said with today's era and with artificial intelligence being in our pockets. And it seems like they're taking Neil Blomkamp wanted to have Sigourney Weaver in his Alien sequel, and it seems like they're taking the same method here. And it also, I think he said in the past that this is going to be a sequel to the first two films, and kind of discounting the last few. Yeah,
so we don't know a ton of details about the actual story, but we do know, and he reiterated again in this Q&A event, that this is going to be a direct sequel to Judgment Day, and sort of in line with the writer's room mentality we were just talking about. The sequel is based on a story that was created by Cameron, but fleshed out with the help of a Terminator writer's room that included David Goyer, who worked on Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy, Charles Egley, who co-created the TV show Dark Angel with James Cameron back in the day, and Josh Friedman, who is working on one of the Avatar sequels, and he also created Terminator: The Sarah Connor Chronicles, so he knows that character particularly well. So that room generated ideas for a new trilogy, but the idea being each of those movies could work as individual films, but it also has sort of an overarching thing. Arnold Schwarzenegger is coming back as well. Just to run down all of the hard facts that we know about this movie so far. There aren't that many. And then we know that this movie is also going to be creating an opportunity to sort of pass the torch to a new generation of actors. So Cameron said last night, quote, "We're starting a search for an 18-something woman to be the new centerpiece of the new story. We still fold time. We will still have characters from the future and the present. There will be mostly new characters, but we'll have Arnold and Linda's characters to anchor it," end quote. So that's pretty much all we know about this new Terminator movie. But like I said, I feel like they're saying the right things to get me excited, and I may end up having the rug pulled out for me once again. But I do like the potential that this has. So I'm optimistic about this one.
Since this is an all, milking franchises to death show, I will also mention something that we haven't written on the site, but James Cameron says that Avatar 2 is going to be starting shooting next week. I'll believe it when I see it. But right. In that line of things, I know we don't have this on the docket, Ben, but could you talk about what is going on with JJ Abrams and Star Wars? Because I know you just wrote up this article for Slash Film. Paramount is apparently not happy with, him basically ditching them again for Star Wars.
Yeah, so I guess when Abrams has been, Paramount has been his home studio since 2006. And I guess he has a lucrative deal with them where it's about $10 million a year for like overhead and development costs and stuff like that with his relationship with Paramount. So he has the Bad Robot Studios, but he also has office space on the Paramount lot. And in 2013, when he signed on to direct The Force Awakens, Brad Grey, who was the CEO of Paramount at the time, he's since passed away, I think just a few months ago.
Yeah.
He was not happy about Abrams leaving Paramount to go over to Disney and Lucasfilm to direct The Force Awakens, because he thought that, they had this deal and everything. So I guess after The Force Awakens was done...
I think Abrams was originally supposed to direct Star Trek 3.
Okay.
And that's why he handed it off to Justin Lin, and they were kind of not happy with that.
Yeah. Yeah, so after Abrams finished The Force Awakens, apparently Brad Grey went into this renegotiation process to try to basically force Abrams to direct his next movie for Paramount and not, allow him to go to another studio, because he thought that that was the deal they had, basically. But now Jim Giannopoulos, who used to be the head of 20th Century Fox, he has now taken over the Paramount CEO position. He was not happy when Abrams got hired to direct Star Wars Episode 9, because it was basically just a replay of the whole thing that happened a few years earlier. So yeah, Paramount is not thrilled about this, but they don't really have a lot of leverage right now. They're a studio that has not had a bunch of hits this year. They've been fairly battered at the box office, most recently with Darren Aronofsky's Mother only making like $7.5 million in its opening weekend. So
and they're now running advertisements on TV promoting the bad reviews, saying come see what everybody's talking about, which is just insane.
Yeah, it's a cool tactic. I think I appreciate them sort of fully leaning into that. But yeah, apparently Paramount has accommodated Abrams' move, but they basically didn't really have much of an alternative, right? Like, they could have fought him about it, but then that would have pissed him off. And he has a production deal with them that is set to expire in 2018, and they're hoping that he, once he's done with Episode 9, comes back into the Paramount fold and continues to make movies with them. He's still producing the Cloverfield franchise, for example. Then those are Paramount movies. And then also Paramount probably doesn't want to make enemies of Disney and Kathy Kennedy, by stirring stuff up. So I think their hope is that he comes back and just sort of, picks up and it's business as usual after this Star Wars thing is over.
Yeah, and I know there's a bunch of other projects that he's producing for Paramount. There's some kind of film called Coma, which I think Daisy Ridley's attached to. We've reported about it on the site. A bunch of stuff in the works. But I think they want him back as a director. I mean, not just as a producer. So we'll have to see how this it turns out. But let's move on to the mailbag, and which has a Star Wars related question. Phil in Los Angeles asks, my ultimate hope is that somewhere down the line, Lucasfilm reboots the prequels and tells a story about the fall of Anakin Skywalker with stakes and characters that we can root for and care about. Do you think a prequel reboot is possible sometime down the line? Cheers. Okay, now I think this question is interesting. Not that I want to see a prequel reboot, but I think it's interesting because we got to look past our end lives and accept that almost everything is probably going to be rebooted at some point, right? Like I know we're seeing classics being remade now. Films, not only just 50 years ago being remade, but films, RoboCop came out in the 80s and they've remade that a couple years ago. Mm-hmm. I know that, there are some of these gold standard classics like Star Wars or Back to the Future or Jaws that we have yet to see being remade in any way. Probably, but I think that's probably only a matter of time. I think eventually they're going to. I mean, I'm not saying that they're not going to keep on doing the Skywalker Saga series, but I think eventually the greatest stories of all time. Think about it Shakespeare plays are still put on today and remade today. We get it's just going to happen with this new medium that things are going to be remade for generations to come. We're seeing Disney animated movies being remade as live action, and now being remade as live action, or computer animated posed as live action. So I think we will eventually get to see Star Wars remade. What do you think?
So I think there are two distinct questions here, or topics here, really. They blend together. But I think on one hand, as far as Star Wars prequels go, I think George Lucas probably had the idea of, like, let me tell the Anakin Skywalker story, and then he built 3 movies around that. So it's primarily Anakin's story. And to me, what this question means is a lot of people just want more Darth Vader, right? And that's something that we've been talking about a lot with the upcoming Star Wars movies, and like that character appeared in Rogue One, and that's a character that has an iconography that's instantly recognizable. Everybody knows who Darth Vader is. That's probably why Disney is leaning so hard on that sort of familiarity, to try to launch and relaunch Star Wars back into the public consciousness. But I think people love that character, and I think that's where, if I'm allowed to psychoanalyze Phil for a second here, I'm guessing that's probably why he asked this question, is because he just wants more Darth Vader. I'm not so sure that they'll actually reboot the prequels and tell the Anakin story again, because if you think about it, it's the same kind of thing as them rebooting the original trilogy and telling the Luke story again, and that doesn't really seem like something that they would actually do. So I think as the Star Wars universe continues to expand, hopefully they'll get further and further away from those stories and find their own sort of interesting ground to tread elsewhere. But as far as the, what I think about other, classic movies being rebooted and stuff like that, yeah, I think, if you look at what Marvel and Disney have done with that de-aging technology. In my interview with Kurt Russell, when I talked to him for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, he was talking about how they used some of that de-aging technology in the very beginning of that film. And he was talking about how he doesn't think it's too far off from, a movie where somebody portrays a character that's, 20 or 30 years younger than themselves for the entire movie. And that, I think that is maybe how we're going to get quote unquote reboots, is that they'll maybe use the same actors and digitally de-age them, or maybe have other people stand in and do like performance capture stuff, but overlay them with a digitally de-aged version of that character to basically continue the stories. Maybe not do a full remake or a reboot of them, but I think, and this Terminator thing is a good example.
And by the way, I just want to interject here because we ran this article about some people that might appear in Avengers 4 on the site today, which you can read. Chris wrote up. And he was talking a little bit about Samuel Jackson and this other character that I'm not going to mention that has died in the MCU, possibly appearing in Avengers 4. But Samuel Jackson's appearing in, or he could appear in Captain Marvel. And Captain Marvel set in the 1990s. Samuel Jackson's going to have 2 eyes. We know that. And Marvel has already R&D'd this de-aging, and with Michael Douglas and Ant-Man, Robert Downey Jr. In one of the Iron Man movies, and most recently Kurt Russell with Guardians of the Galaxy. I imagine that Samuel Jackson we see in Captain Marvel, and maybe even this other actor who I won't mention, could be de-aged versions of themselves, because they have to be playing 20 years younger versions of themselves, right?
Yeah, for sure. Totally. And I think that sort of leads into the last point I was going to make, which is if you look at the way that Hollywood seems to be approaching these sort of quote unquote classic franchises, like the Terminator thing is a good example, where the filmmakers are now picking and choosing which movies that currently exist are the ones that they're going to pay attention to and basically canonize. And so like, the new Terminator is just going to be a direct sequel to Terminator 2 Judgment Day, and it's going to ignore all the other ones. And how the new Halloween movie is going to be doing the same thing. Jamie Lee Curtis is coming back to play Laurie Strode once again, but they're basically going to be just looking at the first Halloween, or maybe the first Halloween and Halloween 2, and then ignoring all the stuff that came after that. So I think that kind of mentality is maybe what studios will do. I think maybe there's the potential that we see like a Back to the Future 4 with like a digitally de-aged Michael J. Fox and Christopher Lloyd, or like, you know, other actors standing in for them and then getting overlaid or something, as opposed to a straight remake or reboot of
well, we've been
Back to
seeing
the
a
Future.
lot of that recently with these kind of legacy equals where, like, you know, it's like Tron Legacy, where you're kind of repeating the story, or even, I guess, Star Wars The Force Awakens, where you're kind of redoing a lot of the beats of that original. You're kind of rebooting it in a way, but having some of the old characters be there, the legacy characters. I think it is interesting what you say about Darth Vader, because I think that's what he's getting to. He wants to see more of Darth Vader. You know, the comics are doing a great job at this. If you're not reading any of the Star Wars comics, you know, they're doing some stuff set after New Hope and before Empire Strikes Back. If you think about this, you know, the Death Star has been destroyed by a ragtag group of rebels. You know, Darth Vader is to blame. You know, the Emperor is like pissed at him, and not only that, he discovers that the person responsible was his son. And I think there's some great stuff there that could be adapted into a standalone movie, or even maybe between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope, you could do some stuff there as well. I definitely see the reaction to the Rogue One, his role in Rogue One, has probably gotten Disney, like, you know, counting their dollar bills and being like, you know, we need to do some more stuff with Darth Vader.
Yeah.
The question is, I guess, is if they were to ever remake Star Wars, would they start with A New Hope, or would they start at the beginning of the saga?
Man, that's a tough one. I think it depends a lot on when this this potential thing were to happen, right? I think it's still too fresh. Like, the prequels are still have a bad taste in people's mouths. You know, people are still
you
not
say that,
over
but
it.
we just saw, you know, Spider-Man: Homecoming. You know, a couple years after the Amazing Spider-Man franchise crashed and burned.
Well, that's true, but I feel like you can recast that character and sort of return that character to the studio that will treat him the right way, and it's a little bit different than you know, Lucas, like Darth Vader and Anakin and all that stuff. The Star Wars movies have always been with Lucasfilm. These are the same sort of. I mean, I guess George Lucas is gone now, so that's the big X factor. He was the ultimate overseer of everything, and now you definitely have a new generation of people behind the scenes. So I guess, yeah, I don't know. That's a tough one. What do you think?
I don't know. I know in terms of watching the movies, Drew McWeeny has this article online on HitFix, I think, of how the order he decided to show the films to his kids. Mm-hmm. And that was A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, you know, ends with the revelation, spoiler alert, of Darth Vader being Luke's father. And then having a Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, Revenge of the Sith as a flashback.
Interesting.
Set in between there, and then going to Return of the Jedi. And I think that order is actually very cool. Actually, now, since that, you know, Rogue One is in the mix, I'm not sure if you add that into that ordering at all. But I'm not sure. I don't know. I just think, I know we've talked in the past on Slash Film Daily about ruining the mystique of these iconic characters, and I think the biggest problem with the Star Wars prequels is we want Darth Vader to be cool, and there's no way to be cool when you're showing kind of like the down, you know, showing this guy kind of turn to the dark side.
Yeah. And I think that's a big part of the reason why I feel like there's going to be more side stories or like sequels, like late game sequels, like I was talking about before, like Back to the Future 4 or something. Like instead of seeing a prequel of like how Marty and Doc, became friends or whatever, you can just continue that story using cutting edge technology and that way you give people more of the characters that they love, and Darth Vader remains cool by still having him at like peak coolness with this sort of side story or whatever set in a certain period of time without having to go all the way back to the beginning and fill in details that would lose the mystique of that character.
Well, don't give Robert Zemeckis any ideas about Back to the Future, my favorite film, but thankfully him and screenwriter Bob Gale have said that as long as both of them are alive, a Back to the Future sequel or remake will never happen. And I think that they have some control over the rights to that. But you know what I would honestly like to see, and I know we're running a little bit long here, but I've had this pitch for the longest time for a Jaws sequel / reboot. And I know that's sacrilegious. Jaws is a masterpiece, but I just want to pitch it right here because I'll never have a chance to pitch it to Steven Spielberg, who has no interest in making Jaws movies. But I think that you should base a Jaws sequel now, 40 years later, set in Amity, and it's following Brody's son, and it as if we'll take a cue from Terminator and all the sequels never happened, right? And that Hollywood came and actually made a movie about the events that that inspired Jaws. There weren't any events, but like in this world there were events that inspired Jaws. And basically Amity became kind of like this tourist destination for 2 decades. People came there in a kind of like a tourist trap. And in the 90s the dinosaur craze kind of overtook the nation, and Amity kind of in the last decade has kind of fallen into it's kind of one of those shitty tourist towns. And Brody's son is the chief, and someone gets killed in the water. Is it a shark? Is it someone from the town trying to reignite interest in the town, this seaside town? I think there could be something interesting to revisit Amity 4 decades after Jaws.
Yeah, and that also sounds like an opportunity to explore the ideas about nostalgia, which is a big thing in our culture right now, too. So, yeah, I can see how that could work.
And I think you could also write off the Jaws sequels as sequels that Hollywood made that were based on nothing,
Yeah, that's fun.
In
I like that
universe. And I also like the idea that in that universe Steven Spielberg exists, and his own creation of or his own movie Jurassic Park kind of was the downfall of Amity as a tourist destination. This movie will never happen, but if it does, you heard it here first.
That's a fun pitch. I like that.
Yeah. Anyways, I think we have reached the end of this podcast. If you want to submit questions to the mailbag, send them to peter@slashfilm.com. Please mention your name and general geographic location in case we mention them on the air. Thanks to Phil in LA. You can find more of my work at Slashfilm. You can find Ben at Ben Pears on Twitter. You can find all of our work at slashfilm.com. All the stories we mentioned today, all the milking of franchises, you can find it every day at slashfilm.com. And you can subscribe to this podcast. iTunes, Google Play, Overcast, all the popular podcast apps. Go rate and review us on iTunes. Guys, we are... What were we? Number
9.
Number 9
yeah.
on TV and film on iTunes. Finally, now that the Game of Thrones, the dozens of Game of Thrones podcasts, no one's listening to them. We have finally had a chance to shine at the top. But I want to thank you guys for making that possible. You're listening, you're rating, you're reviewing. Spread the word, help us out. We appreciate it. And we love all the letters that you're sending us. And that's a peter@slashfilm.com. I share it with the whole crew whenever you email us. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you tomorrow.